applies to all of us. His government tried to change a law that meant if you protested, they can do what the fuck they want while you will get arrested. The mess he caused with his Brexit deal, he passes off as Corona. If you dare to mention empty shelves, you're branded a Ramona. The decorating bill for his flat was paid by Tory donors. He doesn't know how many kids he's got. He can't control his boner. Boris Johnson still a fucking cunt. Boris Johnson still a fucking cunt.
Good morning, and it's 10:03. You're listening to Chris Bryant on LBC, standing in for James O'Brien this morning. I'll be taking your calls until 1 o'clock. And it was fascinating to hear that conversation about sunbeds earlier, as one of the people in this country who's had a stage 3 melanoma, and they took a great big chunk out of the back of my head a few years ago, and I was told I had a 40% chance of living for a year, which is quite a frightening little moment in life. I think it's time we did more action on sunbeds. But anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. First of all, we're going to be talking about what Michael Gove started yesterday, a bit of a debate. He said there are certain essential functions that the state needs to do better, and we fail to deliver on them. There are some core functions, giving you your passport, giving you your driving licences, which are simply, at the moment, not functioning. Well, what an admission from one of the most senior politicians in government. He's been there for years. And that's not all. What about the other essential services in British society today? What about getting a GP appointment? You know, the Tories promised in 2016 they would have 5,000 more GPs by now. Have they got 5,000 more? No, they've got 1,726 fewer GPs. So maybe that's the reason you can't get to see a GP. And what about the NHS backlog? 6.6 million people now waiting. And that doesn't include, incidentally, additional treatments for... That's just individuals, not all the treatments that they might be waiting for. I know you can't blame it, Mr Gove and Mr Johnson, on COVID. There was a 4.8 million backlog before we went into COVID. The police, what about the police? Remember the Tories cut the police since 2010 by 20,000? How many of their burglaries are they now solving? Is it, I don't know, half? Would it be a quarter? No, it's 1 in 20. Just 1 in 20. And only 6% of all crimes are leading to a charge today, let alone a conviction. What about schools? Lots of schools are now telling me that when they advertise for a maths teacher or a physics teacher or a chemistry teacher or a modern languages teacher, they get not a single applicant. Not a single applicant. And trainee recruitment is down by 25,000. What about other kind of physicians? Yesterday, the Royal College of Physicians, which looks after the all the different kind of consultant physicians in hospitals, they said that for the first time ever, more than half consultant posts in hospitals last year went unfilled. And 3/4 went unfilled because not a single person applied. Not a single person applied. And yet, this year, we're not training enough people in all of those disciplines like radiology, radiotherapy, dermatology, pathology, to replace the people who are leaving this year. So in 7 years' time, the situation is going to get worse. So my question is, are we going to hell in a handcart? How have we got to this state? Especially because we've now got strikes on the horizon as well in lots of different areas of public services. And inflation's running at 9.4%. Remember, earlier this year, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, he's still the Prime Minister, remember, said that this was something that we shouldn't really be worrying about too much. And public sector staff are being offered 5%, or some of them 2%, 3%. That's not going to match the 9.4% inflation this year, is it? Now, why did we get to this point? That's the question I want you to answer. Why did we get to this point? Is it that Tory governments are always so obsessed with creating a small state that we just, they cut taxes, or they say they're going to cut taxes. We'll come on to that maybe a little bit later, because actually they say they've cut taxes, but actually they put up 15 taxes in the last 2.5 years. But just leave that to the side for the minute. Is it because ever since 2010, we've had basically Tory governments that are so obsessed with trying to reduce the role of the state, so ideologically obsessed with things being done by the private sector, rather than taking a kind of pragmatic decision about who's the best person to do it, that That's why Britain isn't working anymore. It's just not functioning. The basic elements aren't functioning. Or were they just too complacent about inflation? Or was it just that they're not very good at running the country? I mean, maybe it's just as basic as that. They haven't seen what's coming along in the future, and they haven't prepared. They didn't prepare for COVID. They didn't prepare for the summer heat, and all the infrastructure is falling apart. So I want to hear what you think. Are we going to hell in the handcart, or is this me being, a blooming lefty, always obsessed with trying to get more people in working for the state and taking more of your hard-earned money in taxation? I want to hear from you, especially if you work in public services. I want to hear from you if you think I'm completely barking up the wrong tree. You can call me on 0345 60 60 973. 0345 60 60 93. So do get in touch, or you can text me on 84850, or you can tweet at LBC. But do let me know what you think, because these are big issues facing the country at the moment. As we go through this next phase, and we'll be talking a little bit later on in the morning about the issues to do with Boris Johnson and his, I'd love to say imminent departure, but it just doesn't feel very imminent at the moment. It seems a delayed departure, a bit like everybody's summer holiday, a delayed departure. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the Tory leadership race. But what's the state of Britain at the moment? Are we really facing the future, a rosy future? Or is there a danger that we really are going to hell in a handcart? So let's listen to Ken from Leeds. Ken, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Chris. It's a bit warm, isn't it? But I'm fine, absolutely fine. Very pleasant to speak to you. I've always admired your work in the Commons.
Thank you.
Chris, the question that you asked, how did we get where we are and what's going to happen? I'm sure that the reason that we're in these crises is that Boris Johnson, for his own reasons, surrounded himself with incompetence, ministers that are not capable of doing their job, of taking the right decisions. And it goes way back to the pandemic. I think particularly Matt Hancock was extremely loose in his handling of the COVID crisis. And I think every single minister that is put in place seems to be wobbling and not really driving anything. And when you do that, if you put an incompetent person in charge of an important task, they're going to fail. And that's exactly what they're doing. And as to the future, goodness knows. I could not believe that people would vote a Tory government in again, but I'm quite prepared to accept that they might.
Oh, no, I think we've got to try and bat that one off. But just so Matt Hancock was in this seat yesterday, wasn't he? I don't know whether you had a chance to listen to him. Was he more incompetent than anyone else, or was the issue really about the Prime Minister, do you think?
Certainly the Prime Minister, but I think in the case of Hancock, the job was much more serious than any other that's come up in my living memory. And I think the mishandling of that between him and Johnson and the bungs that they gave to their friends and the jobs and the corruption, absolutely terrible spectacle to see. And I'm afraid that on a low-key thing, if you look at the way Grant Shapps is dealing with things, he's supposed to have sorted out the airline thing. Great, okay. Now have a look at the railways. But he won't. Has he sorted
out the airlines? It doesn't feel like that. Nearly everybody I know who's booked a summer holiday is terrified that their flight's going to be cancelled, unless, obviously, they're staying in the UK.
I'm not saying he's done it. I'm saying he says he's done it.
Right.
So there's a difference. But, he's not getting involved in the railway thing at all. And I think that every trade union has the right to expect their wages to be brought up to inflation. The working people of this country have got rights, and too often the Tories forget about them all and just go along with their ideology, and they don't think that working people deserve any better than they're prepared to give them, and that's totally wrong. OK,
thanks very much, Ken. Thanks very much for calling in. I guess I agree with that point about the way we dealt with COVID. And interestingly, lots of people say, they get, Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock, they delivered the vaccine and so on. Lots of people will be surprised and will disagree with me now, but this is a fact. France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Finland and Singapore all have higher vaccination rates than the UK on COVID. Anyway, Paul from Bellingham, what's your take on this?
Hi there. My take is the situation is obvious. We've had 12 years of the Tories with implementing their ideology, having a free run with this country, running it down. But, everyone that knows the Tories and what they stand for know that they are anti-public services. They want as small a state as possible. They want to run it down, and they want to run the unions down with pay restraint. They're now getting the situation. They've now got a situation where nobody wants to work in the civil service anymore because the pay rates are not as good as they can get elsewhere.
Well, I think even the government admits that in relation to education, there's a real problem about recruiting teachers because, pay rates over the last 10 years simply haven't kept up with inflation. And that's why you're seeing so many people leaving the profession early. Some of them complaining too about, the pressure, the difficulty of teaching today. But you think it's essentially about the ideology of whether the state does it best or whether the state should get out of the way.
Yeah, and the way that the individual departments are run as well. I can't speak authoritatively about most departments, but in the Department of Employment, where you've got 1.3 million unemployed and 1.3 vacancies. I worked in the Department of Employment for 30 years, and I know what my friends are going through now,
right.
And they're trying to operate a system of management that just won't work.
Well, one of the interesting things, do you remember Boris Johnson's been told off repeatedly over the last year by the Statistics Authority because he keeps on saying that there are more people in employment now than there were before COVID. It's actually factually inaccurate. It's one of those instances of lies, damn lies and statistics because basically there are fewer people who are self-employed and some of them have gone into employment. But if you take the total number of people in employment or in self-employment, the number's lower. I completely agree with you. But we're going to be going to a break in a minute now. Thanks very much, Paul. But tell us how the Tories would try to defend themselves. Please come on. If you believe in a smaller state, you think that the state does too much these days. You're listening to me. I'm Chris Bryant, and the time is 10:18, and we're talking about whether basically Britain is working. Does it function? Or is it breaking? So, Tom from Guildford, I think you're a nurse, is that right?
Yes, I work in the private sector. I was an NHS nurse, but I had to leave the job.
Why was that?
I couldn't afford my bills.
You couldn't afford you're paid as a nurse and you couldn't afford your bills? Yeah,
I left the NHS about 5 years ago to go in the private sector, and I think I was taking, Monday to Friday, I was taking home about £1,400. But if I worked as a support worker on nights for the NHS, I'd earn more. So I went on to nights, earned a bit more, and I went private, which helped me pay off my mortgage, really, to be honest.
Right. And we've seen... I mean, this must be one of the most shaming things in Britain, isn't it? That we have people that we all clapped during COVID as key workers who are simply not able to pay their bills, so they end up going to the private sector. So what do you mean by working in the private sector, Tom?
I've gone to a private hospital to work as a nurse, and I get paid more hourly rate. Probably not as much, like holiday pay and things like that, sick pay, but the hourly rate's a lot higher. And the agency rates, example, one of my friends is doing agency right now as a support worker, and he takes home £1,600 a week.
Right. And then there's this
that we're paying for, yeah.
And there's this nonsense, isn't there, of people who because the NHS can't recruit enough staff, then
They can. They just don't hire. When they sack people, they don't recruit them. It's top management. Get rid of the KFC managers, employ people. Example, the NHS, a local NHS can save £1 million a year just by getting rid of agency staff. If you stopped using agency, where would they go? They'd go and join full-time banks, full-time jobs at the hospital, and just pay people more money that they deserve. You can't live in a place and not afford to, if you work in a place, you can't afford to live there. There's no point staying.
And I've seen examples of hospitals providing food banks for NHS staff.
And that's disgusting. And we used to get fined for parking our cars, being late for work, not being able to find parking, and they've hired private companies to clamp us.
And just going back to the agency stuff, the bonkers thing about that is the NHS is paying over the odds, the agency is taking a chunk of the money, and the staff are getting less of it.
So imagine operations, private consultants who work for the NHS, and this is just me telling you off the cuff, the mistakes they make in surgery, they bring them back to the NHS and they cover it all up. So that happens. Patients in prisons, example, a prison inmate who gets dementia, he or she will go to a private establishment, still on section. But because as a government we're closing all these external factors down, like community hospitals, this and that, they have to go somewhere.
Yeah.
I was working in a care home, and my bosses were on £100,000 a week profit.
And now we've got this problem with care homes, haven't we? Because lots of care homes are saying, which are privately run, they're saying, sorry, we can't afford to run the business on these tight margins, and so we're going to hand the work back to local government. But Tom, thanks very much for your time. Can I ask? See, the question that's rattling around in my head is that there must be lots of people out there. You must be thinking that maybe you have a bit of sympathy for the government. Maybe you think, it's all because of COVID and those kind of issues. Or maybe you do just think that, because at the moment we've got the highest tax take that we've had in 70 years. So maybe you're thinking, well, I'm sorry, we just can't afford to do any more. Or do you still think, actually, we need to strengthen all these different organisations, all the different parts of the state that make life possible? So, it'd be quite good to be able to get on an aeroplane with a passport in time and things like that. I want to hear from you. 0345 6060 973. And maybe you'll tell us what you think the next Tory leader should do as well. But let's go to Phil from Guildford. Phil, how are you?
Hello, Chris. It's an honour to speak to you. Absolute honour. I love what you do in Parliament. So keep fighting the good fight, my friend.
Thank you very much, Phil. What's your take on all of this?
Well, coming from it from a bit of a different standpoint, I agree with all the previous points so far as well. But my point being, when you ask the question about the fundamentals of government, one of the things that still boils my blood is the energy sector and what people have had to put up with over the last year in terms of energy rises.
Yeah.
My point being that the fundamentals of government surely is that if you're voted into place by the people, you're there to protect the best interests of the people that voted you in. And so when you see an industry like the energy sector that are forecast to put prices up 200, 250% and effectively put people, the most vulnerable people, into poverty, you should be stepping in and doing more. And if you take the example of, say for example, France, where they intervened to a certain degree and managed to make people's energy bills only rise by sort of 6-7%. It doesn't work.
Same in Spain as well, I think. And in fact, in Greece, and I know it sounds odd to think about heating costs in Greece, but it's kind of the opposite. As in a sense, what it's been like here for the last 2 days is air conditioning costs. There, the government guaranteed for the poorest households that they would match 80% of the increase in energy costs, which we just didn't have here, did we?
No, exactly. And this is the thing that I think it worries me, that we should, as a nation, we should be absolutely outraged by this a lot more and pointing a lot more at the government for help. They will turn around and say, oh, yes, we helped. Yeah, we helped a bit. But at the same time, you're plunging people into poverty. And when, energy prices, for the most part, we're just being told to, well, prices have gone up, you've got to put up with it. When it isn't the same in other countries. The governments have intervened as they should have done. And I think that comes back to the point of a fundamental of government is to look after the people that voted you in. And with the energy prices, and then obviously having to pay extra tax and extra national insurance on top, it just isn't good enough.
And do you think
you're clearly not looking after people.
Sorry, Phil, do you think that's because in essence, they think that business should be allowed to do whatever it needs to do. So that's a kind of ideological thing, or is it just they were a bit complacent about the situation? Because, as you know, the Labour Party argued very strongly for a windfall tax. They all said, no, we can't do a windfall tax. It's absolutely preposterous. We said, well, they've had windfall profits, so we should have windfall tax to be able to help more people in the cost of living crisis. And when they introduced they caved in, didn't they? They introduced a windfall tax. Their version basically gave half of the money back to the companies if they invested it. So do you think it's like they're too in hoc to big business?
There seems to be a fear of doing things with big business. No, I totally agree, because when the windfall tax was announced, but they kept talking about there's also investment opportunities and investment incentives and things. And it was, even to me, I was just like, well, I'm not stupid. That sounds sort of like a double-edged sword here. That's not really a windfall tax, is it? And no. It just seems, for some reason, there's a lot of people at the top that seem very, very scared to enter into or even put certain sanctions on the companies that are making the most profit. And as we all know, there's about 100 companies in the world which also tie into the biggest emissions in the world as well.
Just one more question on this to you, Phil, which is, do you buy the argument that this is all about Ukraine?
Absolutely not. Because it's not all about Ukraine, because you just take any other country that have had the same issues as us and use them as an example. Like you said, France, Spain, they've all done it. So that's not an excuse, but I'm quite used to excuses and, the whole, we got the big calls right and COVID and so, that doesn't wash anymore.
Okay.
There's certain times and there's certain things you have to say, yes, there's things going on, but people are suffering. You need to deal with this. What are you going to do about it? And as you said, a fundamental of government.
100%. Phil, thanks very much for calling in. We'll go to Veronica in Tunbridge Wells. Veronica, I think you also work in the NHS, but in a different part of the NHS, don't you? Or in a different way in the NHS, anyway.
Yes, good morning, Chris. Yes, I actually joined the NHS in 1988 on what was then called the General Management Training Scheme. And that was on the back of Mrs. Thatcher saying that the NHS had to get more business-like. And the NHS actually trained thousands of managers in order to take over and to run in a more efficient-like way how the NHS works. So it does seem to me really bizarre that people are now bashing managers that A, they earn too much, and B, they're paper pushers. Well, some of them may earn a lot of money, particularly the chief executives, but I don't think somebody who runs a hospital or a trust doesn't deserve the money they earn. We're not dealing with the manufacturing of baked beans or cereals. We're actually talking about running a hospital where people's lives matter. The attitude as well as the care matters. The amount of infrastructure that has to make sure that there's the right person at the right time with the right needs is really important.
I get that, Veronica, and I think sometimes it sometimes feels as if people just want to drive a wedge between clinicians and managers, whilst not accepting that in the end, every public service needs to be run efficiently, effectively, because otherwise you end up with the problems that we've had in some hospitals in the UK where they simply haven't been able to provide safe care.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right. There is very little division in that sense, because we have lots of nurse managers, an awful lot of clinicians actually go into management levels because with their knowledge of how to run it clinically, it actually makes the whole hospital more efficient and better. And I actually think it's really disingenuous for people to say management is one thing, it is not.
And what do you think of the argument that basically you need matron to run everything?
Well, it's more or less when I came in 1988, we had matrons running things. And matron is, in effect, a nurse manager, but a very senior one.
Right.
And so I think we need to be really careful what we're talking about. And can I just very quickly go on to the agency staff thing?
Yes, quickly.
Very quickly, is that a lot of nurses make the decision to not actually work full-time, but to go on the agency payroll because pro rata, they earn more money, but they forego sickness and holiday pay. And there's also an awful lot of pressure on managers to have fewer people on their full-time books because that's what the government would like to see. It's less money to the government.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that, Veronica. You're listening to Chris Bryant on LBC. We're talking about the issues in running the country, whether the country's going to hell in a handcart because, frankly, most of our public services are in decline or in danger or in trouble of some kind or other. Hello. So, yes, I'm still Chris Bryant. I'm still not James O'Brien, and I probably never will be. More to the point, I'm also not Matt Hancock from yesterday. But anyway, we are talking about whether the country's going to the hell in a handcart because of the problems in so many of our public services based on Michael Gove himself. The great Panjandrum, who said yesterday that there are certain essential functions that the state needs to do better and we fail to deliver on them. Why the government hasn't resigned just on the back of that sentence, I don't understand. But anyway, we're going to move to a slightly different aspect of this from Richard in Chiswick. You wanted to talk about barristers going on strike, I think.
Well, Chris, let me tell you, I'm a criminal solicitor. I do legal aid work. I represent people who get arrested in police stations and in magistrates' courts. If their cases go to the Crown Court, I brief a barrister to represent them. What's happened to the criminal justice system is a very good example of what's happened to public services. Essentially, no money has been put into this, not no money, but not enough money has been put into this system. And I'm not just talking about lawyers, I'm talking about police officers, the court service, prisons. It doesn't matter where you look. Courts have been sold off. They're becoming dilapidated. You get courts that have to be closed because they're flooded, faults in the ceiling, that sort of thing.
And do you think that means that people aren't getting justice?
Well, of course it means that. I mean, there's a massive backlog of cases in the Crown Court. People are having to wait literally years to have their cases tried. Now, that's not good for defendants, especially if they're in custody. But it's not very good for alleged victims either. If they want to give evidence about something that's happened to them, they don't want to have to wait 2 years. It's a stress for them worrying about what's going to happen. What's happened in relation to funding of legal aid, and it's quite an interesting example, this, because the people who provide the service are not in a state-owned service. Legal aid services are provided by criminal law firms which are privately owned. So it's nothing to do with publicly owned, privately owned. Yeah. These are privately owned businesses that are trying to make a profit with great difficulty, actually, because they have to pay their rent and all the rest of it. There has been no increase in legal aid rates for criminal work since 1994. That's serious. In addition to which, there's been a cut of 8.5% and various other changes, which basically mean we're being paid very much less than we were 30 years ago. It's frankly almost unbelievable, but that's the truth.
And you can't get natural justice, can you, if you can't have proper legal defence?
Well, that's my view. I've been doing this since 1983. I'm 74 years old. I've never done it for the money. If I'd wanted money, I'd have gone into a city firm. You can make 100,000 quid a year as a newly qualified person in a city firm. In a criminal firm, you're probably getting 20-something thousand. You know, there's just no comparison. And when I started, it wasn't that different, actually, between the two. If you looked at pay rates in city firms and legal aid firms, it wasn't that much different. Now, because of this underinvestment, the whole system is falling apart. You mentioned the barristers. I'm a solicitor, not a barrister. I instruct a barrister to deal with my Crown Court cases. They are on strike every day this week. They've been running a cumulative strike program. They started with 1 day. The next week they took the Monday and Tuesday. Yeah. The next week 3 days, then 4 days. This week we've got to 5 days. And their problem is they cannot get, it's very much like a lot of other areas, they cannot get junior entrants into their profession because they're not being paid enough. Junior barristers can be being paid £12,000 a year. And when they go to the Crown Court, if, for instance, they have to travel to Manchester, they have to pay their own fares. They're not even paid their fares. It's really ridiculous.
But one of the traditional arguments that a Conservative would advance is that the market will provide, and that if there's enough demand and there's not enough supply of good lawyers, then that will somehow rectify itself because people will end up getting paid. But your point is legal aid is, of course, a fundamental acceptance by the whole of society, that somebody, when accused of a trial, accused of a criminal offence, needs to be able to have a proper defence.
Yes.
And if you don't get that, then we haven't got a criminal justice system that's worth, boasting about around the world. And and do you see that as part and parcel of a kind of disregard for the rule of law generally, or not?
I'll be quite honest. I know you're a Labour politician. The Tory government over the last 12 years certainly hasn't helped. But the fact is that the Labour government before it was not funding this system properly. It was better than it is now. Part of the problem is that with the austerity cuts over the last 12 years, the whole system has been ground into the ground. And the problem with Johnson, funnily enough, I can't stand the fact he tells lies the whole time, but that's not the worst thing he's done. The worst thing he's done is come into power, talk about levelling up, and basically phrase, but he's somebody who spouts off about things and then doesn't get things done. And nobody in his cabinet has done any better. They haven't got anything done in relation to this. Let me tell you one thing. They set up a legal aid review chaired by Sir Christopher Bellamy, a QC, very respected person. He came out with a finding that the system needed £135 million a year put into it just to keep it going for the time being and to look at what else needed to be done later. 135 million. The government have purported to say that they're going to put that 135 million in place at the end of September for some reason. Don't know why the delay. What's happened actually is they're not even paying that. They're claiming they are, but they're not.
Right.
So they're trying to finagle things again and not spend the money on the right bits of it.
Great word, finagle, Richard. Thank you very much for that. Not as good as kerfuffle or shenanigans, but one of my favourites. Now, Matthew, I think you've got a view as well, haven't you, from Farnborough in Hampshire. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, I do indeed. It's great to be on, great to speak to yourself. Thank you for the work you do. I guess to give kind of full disclosure for it, for me, I've voted Conservative for the last 10 years, but when I try to look at things from the outside, take unbiased out of it and all that, and I think one of the issues I find with a lot of this is when you look at the party in power, or even yourselves as Labour, it's how are we funded as parties and how does that influence decisions? Now, granted, above the door, we're advertised, no influence. But when you've got Conservatives that are funded by, let's be honest, the rich and elite of the country, and lo and behold, you've got windfall tax and half delivering it, mainly because the tax in their funders.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, on the opposite side, you've obviously got Labour, who are funded by the trade unions. But even on the same side of that, you've got Keir Starmer saying, don't go to the front line, don't support them on the picket lines. It makes it a real hard one in terms of kind of, in a way, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think do we kind of revolutionise this in terms of, right, going forward, it can't be predominantly funded from one particular source, for instance. You have to be, and don't get me wrong, I don't know the answer to this question, but is it a case of you can no longer have, more than 20% of your funding from a particular industry or particular source? Because you can't help but feel Conservatives do look out for those that are more affluent, should we say, whereas Labour is looking out for the trade unions.
Well, indeed, one of the things I've been banging on about for a very long time is about dirty Russian money in British politics, and it's quite interesting how many Conservative MPs have taken money off people that I would think of as being really very dubious and quite closely connected, certainly in the past, with Vladimir Putin. But just to go back to this issue about strikes, well, first of all, Matthew, you said that you voted Tory for the last 10 years. What would you do if there was a general election today?
It's a tough call, to be honest with you. Again, trying to be unbiased and pull out of it, or zoom out a little bit, shall I say. If I think back to maybe 15 years ago, what was almost one of the biggest trends in this country, it's very much where the benefit state, benefit handouts, it pays not to work. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily saying that's draft, but I think from a benefits point of view, in a wrong way, 100% the wrong way, that has changed. And now you don't open your Daily Mail, your Sun, and see benefits grounds, that kind of mentality.
I know, but if you open the Daily Mail and the Sun, if that's all you ever read, you're going to get one version of the world, aren't you? I mean, you really are. I mean, the last 10 days, both those newspapers have just got absolutely obsessed with trying to destroy Penny Mordaunt. And remember, earlier on in the year, they got absolutely obsessed with trying to destroy Keir Starmer over the events in Durham. And then the police found that there was no case to answer. So I'm not sure that just listening to the Mail and the Sun is going to give you because you said you wanted an unbiased view on life. But what do you think Labour needs to do to get your confidence and trust?
I think it's actually coming out with a solid plan, right? And I suppose this is the hard aspect out of it. Realistically, Labour can offer, and I appreciate this is almost a hard statement to make, if you're the opposition party, you can offer a better climate to be in. You've got a leadership contest going on, you've got inflation, you've got the public sector pay, you've got the COVID debt. I mean, there's such a wide range of measures that you can just hone in on one. Just hone in on one and you can make headground.
But also, isn't there another point? Just to go back to the strikes point, don't you need you need government ministers in every single department just to always be... I mean, their motto should be negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. Get round the table. Always get round the table. Never walk away from the table. Because otherwise, it's commuters that suffer when strikes happen, and for that matter, the people who have to strike, because striking is never an easy option for anybody. And you know, lots of people, you lose pay, it puts you in a more vulnerable position, and it may harm the industry and all the rest of it. Nobody wants to strike. No trade union ever wants to strike. But it just feels to me like with Grant Shapps, you know, he hasn't sought to bring. If anything, it's felt as if he's sought to bring about the strikes. And just one thing I'd say about whether Labour frontbenchers should or shouldn't join a picket line. I'm very, very sympathetic to the position of lots of people in the public sector. I hope that's come across in this whole hour. I think the Tory government since 2010 have basically undermined the public sector in every single aspect of the way Britain is run. But if you are the opposition, the whole point of you being the opposition is you are an alternative government. You want to be the government. So you should never do something in opposition which you wouldn't legally or properly be able to do in government. So if you're the shadow transport secretary, hoping to be the transport secretary, of course you can't go on a picket line, because you wouldn't be able to do it if you were the transport secretary. You'd be going on a picket line against yourself. It's a nonsense. Do you understand what I'm saying there, Matthew?
Yeah, no, definitely. Kind of, you've got to lead by example. You can't just take the moral vote, if you like, the moral win now to then not do that in a role. I totally agree with that. And then, to be fair, even on that topic, it's interesting. And again, I suppose it's not the best example to Boris government, but I find it quite amazing how it's almost, if you're in favour of the given leader, here's the title, here's a ministerial role. Do we need to almost explore how those roles get given out and what?
Well, I'd love to know how the Prime Minister Boris Johnson has just given out all his jobs recently, since they all seem to be going to work. They're going to get 2 months of work and 3 months of redundancy pay afterwards. So they'll work for 2 months, most of which is holiday, and they'll get 5 months pay for it. Anyway, Matthew, thank you very much for your time. Interesting to talk to you. And we're talking about the state of Britain today. Is it broken? Is it bust? And I guess, whose fault is it? So, Richard from Eastbourne, what do you want to tell us?
Oh, hi there. First of all, Chris, thank you for continuing to hold the government's feet to the fire. We do need people to keep challenging, so I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. That's very kind.
I'm a sort of semi-retired GP, so I retired in 2019 early, just because I couldn't cope with the stress of it anymore. And then a few months later, a virus appeared, so I agreed to sort of come back and make myself available. I still do occasional locums. I do other work for other bits of the NHS, and I've been involved previously in management and also worked in secondary care in cardiology. So I've got quite a lot of experience in the NHS.
Before you move on to what you're about to say, can I just go back to this bit about you semi-retiring and so on? Because one of the things I've been trying to get the government to do for quite a long time is put in place measures across the whole of the NHS to enable people to stay longer. Is that one of the things that we need to be doing?
You certainly need to make it easier for people to get back in when they need to. I mean, I was fortunate that I'd only been taken off what's called the performance register for a week, when suddenly I saw things on the WHO website that alarmed me. And so I contacted people and said, can I go straight back on without having to do 18 different courses and get,
Right, yeah.
So I managed to get back in because I said, yeah, that's fine, you've only been off a week. So, but I know other colleagues who found it incredibly difficult because of the bureaucracy of getting back in, and some basically gave up and didn't bother.
Okay, anyway, you were going to tell us more about the NHS.
Yeah, I just found... So I qualified as a doctor in 1986, became a GP when Ken Clarke was the Minister of Health in 1990, and immediately in a rural practice started noticing he was trying to shut down small practices, make them join together, and I sort of felt under pressure right from the outset. And then we had this sort of sunlit uplands period under Labour when suddenly money was coming into the NHS. A lot of it was frittered, so it was definitely not ideal, but that was my best period working in the NHS, was under the Labour government. And then austerity hit, and it just basically it corroded everything that, I tried to work for and my vocation, until basically, I just felt I had enough. The workload was just getting greater and greater. And the other thing, the B word didn't help. So up until 2016, I don't think anybody ever mentioned Europe. I hardly ever had a patient mention it. And then afterwards, I was getting lots and lots of patients coming in, suddenly having an opinion about immigration, about the NHS. It's great to see a white doctor who speaks English. And basically, I couldn't cope with that with people that I'd got to know as patients.
Right.
And I think it was just a combination of the austerity. I mean, the austerity bit, because I know the figures. I mean,
sorry, do you mean by that? Sorry to interrupt you, Richard, but do you mean because that upset you, that you felt that they had a set of values that weren't yours?
Yes, people who I'd known, because obviously when you're doing general practice, you get to know people.
Yeah.
And suddenly these people who they'd never mentioned anything about, any concern about foreign workers or boat people or anything to do with European rules.
Right.
Never mentioned anything. I used to see them come in, Daily Mail underarm with something about milkmaids or bananas on the front of the book, but they never talked about it. But then suddenly it became a subject, and that was just really the final straw, I think, on top of everything else. But the main thing was the austerity bit, and with the NHS being, I think on average, the increased funding was 4.7% since the inception of the NHS. But in the period 2010 to 2019, it was effectively underfunded by £156 billion.
Yeah.
So when you then feed that into what happens when public health is run down, I mean, I was involved in the pandemic preparedness for swine flu. So I went through that process in 2019, both as a GP, an on-call doctor, and as a manager. And then just seeing what happened with this pandemic. I mean, I contacted our MP at the beginning of March 2020 saying, shut down now. This, your people are going to die in huge numbers. You need to lock down. My daughter had COVID in the first week of March. Complete disaster management of that. You could see it was all falling apart. But, he just vacillates, he ruminates, he does whatever, was appropriate for him at the time.
Your MP now,
my personal opinion. No, sorry, the leader.
All right.
And I just felt that delay, 1 week's delay, and there were thousands and thousands of additional deaths that could have been avoided.
Well, when he should have been Boris Johnson now, at that moment, he wasn't attending Cobra meetings, was he? He was sitting in a hot tub somewhere in Kent or Surrey or something, and which is not a very pleasant thought in itself. But and NHS inflation is often higher, isn't it, than other forms of inflation, because we develop new drugs, we develop new procedures, new equipment, all of which is brilliant because it saves more lives and makes lives better. But we've now got such a phenomenal backlog. How are we ever going to meet that now, do you think?
I don't think. My real worry is, I'm still doing work, but I'm not involved because I can sort of be one step away. I don't have to worry about how all this is going to get financed in the future. But we're just, seeing the waiting times of everything going up, the backlog of millions and millions of tests, people who are in pain waiting for treatment things. My real worry is that this is just, the plan to sort of degenerate the service is eventually they're going to say, look, it's failed. We have to go to an insurance-based system. And those of us who haven't got
Is that a
insurance.
deliberate ploy, do you think?
I don't know. Again, I wouldn't, I really don't want to make it sort of political.
Okay.
It's just an observation so I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I think there may be elements, of people in the party who maybe would like us to go that way, but no, I can't.
All right.
So.
Richard, thanks very much for your time, and thanks for coming back in during COVID when, you already wanted to retire. I'm sure there are lots of people who are really grateful to you. Thanks very much, Richard. I'm struck by this issue about NHS inflation and the costs of... Because there are more people in Britain, so the NHS is going to need more doctors, not fewer doctors. We're not training enough. When I had my skin cancer, I was lucky that I turned up when I was only stage 3. If I turned up when I was stage 4, there are only really 4 stages, then it would have been much more difficult. And of course, people presenting later for bowel cancer, as we know from the sad news about Deborah today, means often that the NHS has to spend a lot of time and money and may not be able to do so successfully. Anyway, Robin from Gwynedd, what have you got to say?
Oh, yes, thanks, Chris, on the end show. Just like to bring up the issue of what was mentioned earlier about so-called, I call it a myth, where it's led to believe that Conservative governments traditionally don't believe in state involvement in the economy and workplace affairs. I think that's a myth, really, because whatever government's in, they will try and influence matters within work and the economy. For example, if we go back to the 1980s, the Conservative philosophy was to create a free market, and we had biennial legislation which restricted workers' rights right across the UK, attacking unions. If we defended your position, whether over pay, terms and conditions, the courts were waiting to punish us. And if we look to the contemporary Conservative attitude towards workplace rights, in Wales, as you probably know, we have unique legislation.
We do.
Which will protect workers if in dispute. They won't be covered by agency staff. Now, this is a threat that's been used by the Conservative government.
Absolutely.
The RMT, and they're even trying to take away this law made in Wales.
Yep.
So it's a myth to say that Conservative government, less state input, they are always on the peripheral, creating the conditions.
I see the point you're making. Yeah, very good. Thanks very much, Robin. I'm conscious. I mean, I've always just been pragmatic. It's not public good, private bad, or the other way around. It's just you do what works. Is my view. We're just going to take one brief more call in this hour from Jeff in Carmarthen, who I think you're a musician, aren't you? You're not going to play for us though now, I don't think.
Oh, I don't. No, not this time in the morning. No, definitely not, Chris. And thanks for everything you did holding Johnson to account. The whole nation appreciates what you did on that.
I'm not sure that's true.
But the elephant in the room is Brexit. And I don't know if you caught the papers yesterday, but there's some of the bands trying to tour and get out onto the continent now. There's the paperwork's up to £5,000.
Yep.
It's just become impossible. And it's not just touring bands, it's everyone in the creative industries. This is fashion, architecture, design, film, TV. Everyone's experiencing all these hold-ups at the borders. The government keep trying to say they got Brexit done, but what they don't tell you is the effect it's had, and it's likely to hit the GDP of this country by about 4 or 5%. That's all money that's not going to be spent on nurses or hospitals. And something's got to be done to get musicians touring again.
Yep.
I spoke to Lord Frost on the Ian Dale show, actually, and he basically laughed in my face and said, that's what the country voted for. I mean, how can people have voted?
I don't remember that being on a side of a bus.
No. And you know, all we want to do...
Thou shalt not be allowed to travel, Elton John. Thou shalt not perform in Berlin, Milan and Madrid. Thou shalt stay at home. All British musicians. No, that wasn't on the side of a bus, was it? No, you're quite right. Jeff, I'm 100% with you, and I'm sick and tired of endless government ministers saying it's already been sorted when it clearly hasn't. Thank you for your calls on the state of the country, broken Britain, backlog Britain. In the next hour, Boris Johnson is on his way out. Today is his last appearance at PMQs. 3 candidates remain: Rishi, Sunak, Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt. Which of these 3 do you think Labour should fear the most? Or are they all so complicit in Johnson's shenanigans and the cost of living crisis that they're all doomed to fail? And is it enough for Labour just to sit back and watch? I've got my views, you'll be surprised to know. It'll be good to hear yours. You're listening to me, Chris Bryant, the MP for the Rhondda, Labour MP on LBC. And the time is 11:03. I'm standing in for James O'Brien. We'll be taking PMQs a little bit later, of course, which will be Boris Johnson's last ever Prime Minister's questions. Unless something very, very strange is going on. And Theo will be joining me a little bit later to talk us through some of the politics of what's going on in Parliament at the moment. But let's talk about the Tory leadership contest, because when the Prime Minister goes, we'll have another one. The 4 blue bottlers are down to the 3 blue bottlers now. What a choice, they tell us. Boris Johnson is very proud of the Tory party that's creaking with vast quantities of talent. Labour should be quaking in our boots, apparently. Well, I don't quite see it that way, I have to say. I mean, for a start, every single one of them supported Boris Johnson throughout all of the shenanigans that we've seen, you know, the illegal prorogation of Parliament, the lying to the Queen about why he wanted to prorogue Parliament, the Owen Paterson affair, which I was intimately involved in because Owen Paterson was the Tory MP who appeared before the Standards Committee, which I chair, and we found that he had repeatedly lobbied, peddled influence around Parliament with ministers and others and officials on behalf of paying clients who were giving him more than £100,000 a year. And Boris Johnson and all these Tory candidates decided to tear up the rule book to protect their mate, the Tory MP who'd been peddling influence around Westminster. So, and all the way through the Partygate, remember Rishi Sunak himself was also fined, of course, but all through that they excused Boris Johnson's behaviour, all the way up to the very end. And 2 of them, of course, Rishi Sunak resigned at the very last minute, maybe looking for his own future rather than anything else. The other 2 stayed on board the ship as it started going down. And of course, 2 of them, well, all 3 of them backed the rise in national insurance earlier this year, national insurance contributions, something Labour opposed because we just didn't think that it was right to raise taxes at this point where we're just about to go into a cost of living crisis. All of them backed it. They all voted for it in Parliament. They all went on air to defend it. But now 2 of them are saying, oh, no, honestly, I didn't really believe that. I think it's a terrible idea. I don't know who came up with that terrible, terrible thing. And thirdly, of course, I think they're a bit obsessed with all the wrong things. It feels like the Tory party these days is absolutely obsessed with statues. They do more to protect statues than they do to protect women from domestic abuse or from rape. Rape statistics for convictions and even charges, tiny percent, 1 in 100, something like that. And if you go through the candidates, all right, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. For about 5 minutes, 12 years ago, I was a Foreign Office Minister. And I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Liz Truss, Foreign Secretary, came before us a few weeks ago. She just signed a new deal with Gulf states, and she was very proud of it, just published it. So I asked her, Foreign Secretary, you say that we should be less dependent on authoritarian regimes. How would you describe the Gulf states? Silence. And then a bit of a kind of burbling. So I said, well, all right. Are you not prepared to say that it's a country that, for instance, executes 81 people on the same day, or for that matter, invites a journalist, a critical journalist, into an embassy in another country, then kills them and dismembers their body? That is an authoritarian regime? Silence. So then I said, Foreign Secretary, is there, can you tell us, because you said in your latest document on the Gulf states that you want to make sure that Britain is always standing up for human rights and will always call out human rights abuses. So can you just tell me of, when you last raised human rights abuses with the leader of a Gulf state? Well, she said, I would have to check my diary. I can't be able to, need notice of that question. No, go on. Liz, give us a single instance. Just a single instance. Complete silence. She wants to be Prime Minister. She wants to be Prime Minister. All right. Oh, and remember when she sat down with Lavrov, Putin's foreign minister, who's been there forever and a day? She was so well prepared that she didn't even know where Ukraine ended and Russia began. I mean, you could argue, of course, that Putin doesn't know that either. But, I mean, she was completely played by Lavrov, and she wants to be Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak. He's led us to where we are now, hasn't he? He's the person who's been in charge of the economy these years. He's the person who set up Eat Out to Help Out, which was one of the daftest... I mean, it had all the kind of hallmarks of that kind of obsession that some Conservative MPs have with their own little project. You know, Boris Johnson had dozens of them, didn't he? You know, bridges here, there and everywhere, and trying to build a bridge from Scotland to Northern Ireland, trying to the Garden Bridge in London, costing millions and millions of pounds. They love all these big projects with their names on them, but it was a disaster. It was completely the wrong thing to do in the middle of COVID, and it didn't actually help the restaurants. It gave them a headache rather than... help them out financially. And I think that he also ended furlough too early. And that's one of the reasons that we have problems in the airports today, because the companies just let go of too many people. And then you've got Penny Mordaunt, who has been under the most sustained attack. It was a Conservative was telling me yesterday he had never, ever seen such an attack on a British politician in all his days as has been going on from the Sun and the Mail over the last few days. And I said, well, it has been pretty strong, but I would just like to remind you of what they've done to virtually every Labour Party leader since the history of time began. And of course they did it earlier on this year. But Penny Mordaunt, remember, I think she might have been sitting in this very studio when she said that Britain had no veto over whether Turkey joined the European Union. A blatant lie. And now she keeps on repeating it. Britain had... Either she didn't know how the EU worked and she's just ignorant, or she did know and she was lying. And now she's got this great idea now, which is sort of attractive in a kind of way, but it's a bit spooky, I think, which is that MPs should have their own funds to parcel out in their constituencies. Well, actually, that's called corruption. That is literally corruption. It is slush funds. It is keeping MPs in post because they can dole out money to people to support them. We got rid of that in the 19th century. And I would argue that actually all these levelling up funds, the concept of levelling up is good, but making different areas compete for the money and ministers decide where the money goes... fundamentally corrupt. But anyway, those are the three we've got on offer. Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Penny Mordaunt. What do you think? Maybe you think they are all brilliant. Maybe you have a particular... You're a fan of a particular one. Or maybe you think, it's all very well, Chris, you know, but all Labour ever does is criticise. Maybe you think Labour needs to put something more substantial on the table so that people aren't just voting against Conservatives or opposing. They're actually coming up with something that can really excite and enthuse the nation. But tell me what you think. Tell me what you think about the three candidates that are on offer. And just one other little bit to throw into the mix. Boris Johnson, apparently, this is a great... I can't believe this one. 1,800 Tory party members... Bearing in mind it's only Tory members who will be allowed to decide who gets to run this country in a few weeks' time. 1,800 Tory party members, or maybe it's more, have written in to say that Boris Johnson should be on the list. Should he be on the ballot paper? I think he's leaving disgraced. But maybe you think he's leaving with his head held high. That's what he said last week. What do you think? Call me on 0345 6060 973. Text me on 84850. Tweet at LBC. And let's go to Fiona in Winchester. I think you are a Tory party member, aren't you?
I am a Tory party member, yes, although I've never been a supporter of Boris. I have always admired the way that you stuck your head above the parapet and asked the right questions of the Conservative party. I think that's very good opposition. So I want to really thank you for that. They've needed you to do that, and I think it has helped enormously. I do believe that Rishi is the only one who can get us out of this economic difficulty because he does have the experience. And I think it took an enormous amount of nerve for him to introduce the furlough scheme.
Did it?
So I believe he's the strongest. Yes, I do. I mean, the amount of money that was committed to that, I don't have the figure, but I know it was an enormous amount. He really needed to do it, and I think he did it having done his sums.
But there was hardly a country in the world that didn't do something like it, and other countries, I would argue, did it better, more effectively. And I don't know whether you saw the debate the other night. Kemi Badenoch was saying that she, when she worked with Rishi, had tried to say to him, you need to put more in place to deal with the loans frauds, and that failing to deal with that has cost the British taxpayer £70 billion.
Yes, I understand that. I think the way he rebutted that was to say that he had to get the system in place really, really fast. And as a result of that, there was clearly going to be some fraud happening. And he does feel that he's been able to claw at least a third more back since the time that she was complaining about that. So I do believe that he has improved that. But he knew that that was going to be some inevitable consequence. It's never all going to be right. But I do believe he's the one who does his sums, whereas I do think Liz Truss is making it up as she goes along. And even if she does get some calls right on the economy, which obviously is the most important thing, then I don't think she will bring the country along with her. She doesn't have the charisma to do that. I personally don't mind her not having the charisma, but it's clear that people do want a leader to be a real leader.
What do you mean by charisma? We bandy this word around a lot, don't we? What does it mean? Some people are dismissed as not being charismatic. Some people are charismatic. Does it mean somebody you want to go to the pub with? You may never go to the pub. Sorry, Fiona, but
I do occasionally, yes. Somebody who can stand up there and bring an idea up and ask other people to follow, and they will follow. I mean, Boris could do that, but I am not a Boris fan because I don't think he was a good public servant and had his own. He always had his own wishes at the forefront of everything, not the country's. He wasn't a good public servant.
I remember...
So I think that's charisma. Bringing people... It's like in any management position, bringing people along with you is so important.
Yes, absolutely. I remember being in... I've been in Parliament for 21 years now, and I remember being in there with Tony Blair up against William Hague. And what was interesting was William Hague was always very funny, very smart, but his speech never persuaded you of anything. And Tony Blair's speeches often, if you see them written down, they look a bit meh. It's kind of, I don't know, not very strong. But actually, he was persuasive. He would take you from, at the beginning, and this was true of Prime Minister's questions back in those days, you would go into the chamber, or you'd leave the chamber after Prime Minister's questions knowing more than you knew before you went in. And I kind of feel that doesn't happen now.
No, but I believe that Wes Streeting will be able to do that if he eventually becomes leader. I like Keir Starmer, but you don't. I'm interested to hear why you don't think...
Well, I like Keir Starmer. I agree with the second half. On Rishi, my problem with Rishi is he seems very brittle to me. If you ever question him in the chamber, he goes all huffy-puffy. And kind of very cross very quickly. And I think he's got a slightly thin skin. But more importantly, you know, earlier on this year, well, Simon Clarke, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, who obviously works with Rishi Sunak, he and Rishi and Boris Johnson all this year were dismissing inflation as irrelevant. And now we've got inflation at 9.4%. The Bank of England is now predicting that it's likely to top 11% by the end of the year. I mean, maybe it won't affect Rishi Sunak's ability to pay the bills, but it will lots of other people's. That's my problem with Rishi. But anyway, Fiona, I'm really grateful to you for calling in, and thanks for being nice to me. Not many Tory party members are, and I don't suppose I'm going to be on Boris Johnson's resignation honours list. So we're talking about the Tory leadership contest. Two sides to this. First of all, what do you think of what's on offer? And secondly, what do you think the Labour Party should think of what's on offer? Who should we be most frightened of? Is that the right word? It was interesting. A Tory MP, who shall remain nameless, came up to me yesterday and said, "Now, Chris, be absolutely honest with me. Who are Labour frightened of?" And I said, well, if I'm really honest, I don't feel very frightened of any of the three, because I think that the three of them are all very flawed, and in the end, they're all complicit in where we are at as a country. We've got a massive cost of living crisis. We've got lots of families feeling poorer than they were when you came to office. You've been in power for too long. So I'm not complacent, because every political party has the capacity to destroy its own chances in a general election. And who knows what the future might hold. But anyway, you may completely and utterly disagree with me. You may think that one or other of the candidates has really got what it takes. So call me on 0345 6060 973. And we're going to go to Michael from Salford. I think you're a Tory party member, aren't you, Michael?
Yeah, that's right. I'll be voting on this one. My thoughts are that whilst I agree Rishi's the best person to get us out of the economic mess we're in, he's not prepared to do it straight away. He's doing it slowly. People need help now. He doesn't seem to get that, and I think therefore he'll struggle at the next election. My first choice was Kemi. She's gone now. I originally was then.
That was me reacting to Kemi. I can't believe that anybody would want Kemi to be Prime Minister. I find her views dangerous.
I think you're probably petrified of her at the next election. That's probably why. But I was originally happy with Penny as well. But I feel that she comes across very weak, and I feel that Keir Starmer will probably rip her apart. She's also perceived as woke, which the electorate in a secret
What do you
ballot,
mean by woke?
Well, woke has one of those sort of non-descriptive meanings.
Yes, quite. It means nothing.
I just feel that the country in a secret ballot, which is how our elections work, it's a negative. It's perceived as a negative.
No, but honestly, this really winds me up, this thing about woke.
Yeah.
I mean, I watch Strictly.
It means. What does it mean? It means when you're sort of you're PC. Let's not go into it too much, but it has that sort of meaning that people don't want to elaborate on.
No, quite. Well, that's part of the problem, isn't it? But it's just I watch Strictly, and I love the fact that Britain voted for a deaf woman to win, and I love the fact that it's a complete mix, ethnically, racially, same-sex couples, and I think the country loves it. We've moved on. We're not Enoch Powell and Sir Keith Joseph and all that. We've moved on, haven't we? Anyway, sorry, I wasn't going to get drawn on that word. But can I ask you about Rishi Sunak? Because I think Liz Truss is basically arguing that Rishi Sunak is a socialist.
Well, Rishi Sunak is Labour in a blue suit.
Now, you see, I don't like that phrase either. This makes me cross, because I cannot tell you how many times I have been accused of being a red Tory. And if you look at most people in the country, they want politicians who can cooperate across the party divide, who can look for policies that work, regardless of their party advantage, and regardless of ideology, actually. But you want to drag the Conservative Party to I would call it hard right position.
Well, I am that way inclined. To be honest, I regret the fact that Boris Johnson was leaving. It did come to the point where he wasn't capable of winning the next election, but that's because that's our own doing. Our own party has brought him down, which is regrettable.
You could say that he brought himself down.
You could say that. I mean, I do want to add as well, for the record, he goes on, and everyone goes on about three great achievements, which are Brexit, getting us out of lockdown and the fight against Ukraine, I'd like to add a fourth very important one, which is saving this country from Jerry Corbyn. And it is regrettable that he's leaving office, but it came to the point where that was inevitable. And I'll be voting for Liz Truss.
Right. Can I just
she'll get through anyway. If it doesn't get through, I don't know who I'll vote for.
Right. Sorry, Margaret. I'm just going to come back at you on those three things. First of all, Brexit is not yet done, which is why Boris Johnson has told the successors that they've got to finish the work. And secondly, why yesterday and today in Parliament we've been doing the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, which is clear evidence that Brexit has not yet been done. Secondly, on COVID, actually, the Prime Minister likes to claim credit for the vaccine rollout. Actually, we did it faster in Wales under a Labour government than in England. And I'm not aware of the vaccine actually having been produced in the kitchen at Downing Street. I think it was produced by very clever scientists in Oxford. And Sweden, France, Germany, Italy, lots of other countries in the world have had a faster rollout of the vaccine than we have. On Ukraine, I feel that the Conservative government from 2014 onwards, and I was saying this in 2014 onwards, didn't take Putin seriously enough. We didn't fight back enough when Putin first moved into Ukraine and took the Crimea and parts of the Donbass regions. And of course, on top of that, we kept on doling out golden passports to dodgy Russians who are now on sanctions lists to come and live in the UK without asking any questions just because we were obsessed with Russian bling. And I think all of that emboldened Putin. The only person who's responsible for the war in Ukraine is Putin, but I think that we effectively emboldened him. Anyway, sorry, Michael, that was me pushing back on your three things that Boris Johnson has supposedly achieved. But we're going to go to Lorena. Lorena from Belfast. What have you got to say, Lorena?
Hi, Chris. Oh, well, you're charismatic is the first thing I'd say. So there we go. You have a definition now.
I don't think I'm the definition of charisma.
Oh, I definitely find the way you speak in Parliament very charismatic, and your arguments are persuasive. And I think that's the general gist of charismatic. But what I wanted to call out is that, first of all, I really, really want Labour to win the next election. I can't vote for any of you because I'm in Northern Ireland, but it would make our protocol a hell of a lot easier if you won. I think if Liz Truss won the leadership, that would be amazing. She's daft. She'd never win another general election.
Did you say she's daft?
Yes, she's very
That's
daft.
the least of it, isn't it?
I know, it was very kind of me, wasn't it?
Yes.
Rishi's tainted. He's tainted, and personally, I don't think he has enough experience to fix the economy. And as for Penny, I think she's the dangerous one. I think she's the one that can kind of bring the right of the Conservatives and the centre of the Conservatives together. And then, I don't think she'll take all the red wall seats. I think she'll take some of it, though. And I think she could...
Sorry, Lorraine, to interrupt you there, but I just wonder whether... Because this was certainly the view that was around in Parliament a bit last week, which was, Penny Mordaunt, she's the dangerous one. And I just wonder whether that's because we just don't know enough about her, because she doesn't really do very much.
Enough new Thatcher for people to be intrigued. And that's all you need. All you need is the Tory voters to be intrigued. And once they're intrigued, they'll chance her. Because, first of all, she speaks in a more sensible way than Boris. There's not all the ums and ahs. She can coordinate a sentence. They love a coordinated sentence.
Oh, no, she can't. Did you not see on the debate? She froze.
She wasn't very good on the debates. But
and incidentally, just one thing about this contest. Is it not remarkable that Liz Truss still hasn't done a single television interview in the leadership contest? Not a single one.
She won't.
Oh, yeah, because she's daft, yes. Or maybe she's not daft.
Yeah, I reckon on paper she might be smart, but speaking, she just does not come across that way. I'm not saying that she's stupid. I'm just saying that in public speaking, it's not her best form. And also, I think she's painted by Boris's government anyway. And we saw the way she dealt with the Russians, and it was just shambolic.
Yes, completely.
Territory. Oh my God, it was painful to watch.
Okay, Lorena, I get it. You're not a fan of Liz Truss, and I'm 100% with you there. We've had a text from Joe in Sheffield. I think Labour needs to show the country what they would do differently. It can't only be criticism of the Tories. What has Starmer got to offer? Well, that's a question for all of us. Boris Johnson's final PMQs is coming up at 12. Hurrah! That's not the fact that he's doing it, but the fact that it's his final one was my reference there. Theo Usherwood will join us to talk us through some of the ins and outs of what's going on in the Palace of Varieties, by which I mean the Palace of Westminster. And after that, I want you to tell me what you think Boris Johnson's legacy will be. Is he leaving with his head held high, as he told us last week? But for now, we are continuing our conversation about what the three remaining candidates, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt, have to offer the nation. But please call me on 0345 60 60 973. And let's go to Naomi from Mere in Wiltshire. What's your take on this? Are they wonderful? Are they shockingly bad? Do you care?
I think they're all absolutely dreadful. If I had a vote as a Conservative member, which obviously I'm not, I couldn't vote for any of them. I think they're terrible. I mean, they've all. I don't know about Penny Mordaunt, whether she's supported Boris Johnson, but if she had, you couldn't vote for any of them, could you?
Well, she has by definition, because she's remained a minister, didn't she? She never resigned.
Oh, right. I mean, then anyone who went out and parroted those lies that he's told constantly, has to be complicit. So they're all terrible, and all of them with this "let's get Brexit redone." In which case, let's have another referendum, or a second referendum, or whatever you want to call it, because it's all about Brexit, isn't it, for the Conservative Party?
But tell me something, Naomi, because you started off by talking about the lies, and I obviously agree with you, because it's one of the things I've been banging on about for the last while as chair of the Committee on Standards, and I think that standards in public life matter. But we've been endlessly told by the Jacob Rees-Moggs and Nadine Dorrises of this world that the public's not interested in all that stuff. Is that? Do you think that they're right, or they?
No, I think they couldn't be more wrong. I think if we all behaved in that way, we'd all lose our jobs. We'd all. I mean, where would we be? The whole place would be an uproar. It'd be anarchy. It's absolutely ridiculous. And also, I mean, another point: if Liz Truss is trying to model herself on Margaret Thatcher, I mean, and she's the next Prime Minister, all I can say is, God help us. Who on earth needs another Margaret Thatcher?
As the MP for the Rhondda, I've got to agree with you on that one. I don't think the Rhondda was a lover of Margaret Thatcher. She tore the heart out of many communities in this country, and did so, in a sense, deliberately to create division so as to remain in power. And I just wonder whether you think that that's what the modern Tory party is still seeking to do, or certainly some parts of it.
Definitely. I mean, with this business about blinking statues, and this ridiculous, I mean, you were saying earlier, what is woke? What exactly is woke? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Constantly creating division where we just don't need it. Life is hard enough, with climate change. We've just suffered fires in London and everywhere else, and Facebook is full of, we just had COVID and people having anti-vaxxing and, nonsense, all created by stupidity where it didn't need to be. We don't need all this nonsense. We need people. I mean, the worst possible decision created by a Conservative Prime Minister in 2016, but for nothing, for absolutely nothing. And Liz Truss going around saying, I'm creating marvellous trade deals. They couldn't be worse for this country, for farmers.
No, indeed. Okay, well, thanks very much, Naomi. I agree about that point about the Australian-New Zealand trade deal, which we've just signed up, which is, I mean, it's kind of infinitesimally small in relevance to British trade. But, I mean, what that is doing to Welsh farmers is quite extraordinary. But let's go to Will in Exeter. Will, what's your take on this leadership contest or circus or however you want to describe it?
Hi, Chris. Lovely to speak to you. I'm a big fan. I'm also a member of the Labour Party. So from my point of view, I guess that the candidate I fear most is Penny Mordaunt.
Why is that?
I think not because I think she's particularly fantastic. More from a kind of presentation point of view. I think up against Keir Starmer, who I love, by the way. I think he's done brilliant things to the party. But where I think he performs less well sometimes is on media rounds and in that kind of on the hoof setting. I think maybe she might come across maybe as a bit stronger, a bit more, a bit hard to say it. I mean, charismatic's probably going a bit far, but maybe a bit more genuine. I often fear Keir can sound a bit messaged, a bit briefed, and not very free and easy, if that makes sense.
Except my experience of watching Penny Mordaunt in the House of Commons is she's just a bit sort of flat. There's, she reads out the bit that's in front of her, and there's not much more to it. I think she might be a bit of a laugh at the karaoke. I've never been to karaoke with her, and I don't know what her song would be. But anyway, well, thanks, Will. Thanks very much for your time, and good luck to the Exeter Labour Party. Just this issue about wokeness. A few people have been getting in touch about this. So I went to a gay wedding a few weeks. I'm gay, by the way, in case anybody didn't know. I went to a gay wedding a few weeks ago. It was absolutely amazing on many different fronts. Not least because the couple walked into the processional march from The Sound of Music, and then we all sang. The whole of the congregation then sang "Climb Every Mountain," and then we had Somewhere Over the Rainbow sung by a gospel choir. So it's like we had the whole gay canon. But what really struck me was that lots of the people who were there had never been to a gay same-sex marriage before. And slowly by slowly, we're getting to a stage where, and in my lifetime, this has just changed so dramatically, we're getting to a point where I hope nobody would even conceive of getting rid of same-sex unions, civil partnerships and marriages. Not just because I'm in one, and that would obviously be a bit inconvenient for me and my husband, but just because the world has moved on. So I want to say, so to Tory MPs and people on the right who argue all about all this kind of woke stuff, I just want to go, I'm sorry, you should never judge somebody according to the colour of their skin, what accent they speak with, whether they're male or female, what school they went to, what qualifications they've got, or their sexuality. The law should treat everybody equally, and everybody should have an equal chance in life. That's woke. That's me. It's decent British values. John, in Doncaster, what have you got to say?
I was listening earlier to the chap who were trying, unfortunately not very successfully, to describe what woke means. I think he challenged him to describe it. And it's very easy. You can put it into Google and it's easy. Alert to injustice in society, especially racism. Now, I didn't find that particularly hard to understand. But the fact that he was trying to, on the spot, come up with a definition of it means he doesn't understand it. He's just regurgitating that word in, I think I said to... like a Pavlovian manner. It's like, oh, woke bad. And a lot of the...
Like a slobbering dog, you mean?
100%, yeah. Like,
I don't think I meant to call us in slobbering dogs, probably.
I'll take, I can get any compliments, I'll take them, that's fine. But it's like, they know that woke equals bad, but they don't know what woke actually means.
But do you think those who are trying to weaponise this, is that basically the Trump handbook? Is that what this is? And where does that end? That's my kind of question.
It is. It's exactly that. But let's look at the other things that these phrases that are coming into political conversation. Got the big cause right. What does that mean? No one questions it anymore. Well,
no.
a lot
I
of
do.
people question. They just say, "Oh yeah," and I am thankful for you. I'll be honest. You're one of the MPs in Parliament who I do admire. I think you've got the knowledge, the courage, and you call it as it is. But the other things, got the big calls right. Get Brexit done. Is Brexit done? Ask Penny Mordaunt. She might know.
I know. Quite.
These crazy slogans. Everything's been broken down into these sound bites, and it's not helped by the. Again, this is normally James O'Brien's slot, and I think he uses the term client media. Is it?
Yeah.
It's just bills just constantly pushed out, and people absorb it, and I don't think they really understand why. If you ask somebody to describe what, like you did, 9 out of 10 times, they'll say, "Well, snowflakes or something."
Yeah.
I don't get it.
I get, John, before you go, can I? Because you're in Doncaster, lovely Donny. You've had quite a bad time with the fires as well, haven't you, in the last 48 hours in Doncaster?
Yes, it's been quite bad. There's been some fires around us in Sprotborough. I'll be honest, I'm dressed almost a little bit like that famous picture of yourself, although we're not quite as much panache.
We're not going back to that, thank you very much.
No, I'm afraid, I'm sorry, but...
well, I've now got this terrible image. I've got two images in my head. One, Boris Johnson in a hot tub, which I put out there myself, so it's entirely my own fault. And now I've got a picture of you, I think, slightly dressed. John, thanks very much for calling. Thanks. So, David from Pinner, I think you have a slightly different take from everybody else this morning.
Well, my take is that the only person that can beat Starmer is Starmer. I think he's up against what Max Hastings called the gallery of ghastlies. Can you just imagine Truss or the other lady being Prime Minister? I can't. I could imagine the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer being Prime Minister, but I don't think the population will vote for him. With his £200 loafers and his multi-millions in the bank, they've got no chance.
I think £200 is a bit of an underestimate. You've been shopping in the wrong places, I think, David.
Starmer needs to be a bit less wooden. He also needs to get some policies out there. It's quite understandable that he wasn't able to say much about policy during COVID and so on because he had to be supportive of the government. But now is the opportunity. And frankly, Chris, if he doesn't perform, you've got to get Andy Burnham.
Well, thank you very much for that, David. I'll bear that in mind. I'm not sure I agree because, you see, I remember after the 2019 election, it was such a terrible, result for Labour. I mean, awful. Seats that we've held forever. I'm now the only MP who represents a seat which has been Labour since 1885. And I was worried in the Ronda in 2019. We did fine in the end, but and the party was in a terrible state financially. We had terrible problems around anti-Semitism. We had terrible problems around factionalism within the party. Everybody at war with one another. And I have to say, Keir Starmer has turned the Labour Party around faster than I thought was possible at all. So I'm sorry, I'm a Keir man. Right, PMQs up in a moment. Boris Johnson's last outing, talking about the Tory leadership contest. So David from Ulster, I don't know, how do you pronounce that? Ulster?
Ulster, you've got it right, yeah.
But it's not Leicester. How's that? It doesn't work. English is a very strange language, isn't it?
It is, Chris. We've just moved to the area, and we, as a Brummie, we say Ulster. But then people think you live in Northern Ireland.
And then there's Shrewsbury and Shrewsbury. That's all very difficult.
It's so complicated, and we don't make things easy for ourselves, do we?
No, an aristocratic family is called Cholmondeley, who apparently you pronounce Chumley, and Featherstone Hall, which is Fanshawe. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. What were you, David? What were you going to talk about?
It's great, though. It is great to talk to you, Chris. What I wanted to say first off is you're a hero of mine, Chris, in what you do in Parliament and how you hold people to account.
I don't know how we let you on the show. How did that happen? Are you my long lost brother?
You are, yeah, absolutely. Well, that check that we talked about last night is in the post. You've done a Lee Anderson thing there. So, sorry about that. But no, you've grabbed my attention in politics. You've really got my interest, and I've got an affinity with the Rhondda. My grandparents were from the Rhondda.
Oh, right.
So from Treorthy and Treorchy. So, yeah, got a lot of affinity there.
God's own country. Anyway, come on, let's get back to the Tories.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris. Yeah, I'd have to talk to you again another time. The wokeness thing has really got me my blood boiling a little bit, to be honest. I think you said about it being weaponised, and I think it's a defence mechanism, isn't it? It's for the Tory government, especially what's been going on in the last few years with Boris. Is they're scared with anybody standing up for themselves for what's right. And they are absolutely scared, and they try and shut things down. There's so many different examples, aren't there, of where they've tried to stop things because it doesn't meet what they believe is correct.
I know. I thought it was extraordinary last year when you had some Conservative ministers criticising football players for taking the knee in support of their black colleagues who had faced racial abuse and on the pitch. I couldn't. And then they tried to make such a big thing about it, and I was just thinking that's just common decency. What's wrong with being polite?
Exactly, it's what's right, isn't it? We should all treat people as equals and treat people as you want to be treated themselves. And obviously, a lot of the Tory government don't want to be treated very well.
No, well, I think the irony of life is the Conservative Party these days isn't even very good at being conservative. But anyway, look, David, thank you very much. And as you said, the cheque is in the post. I haven't actually got a chequebook anymore, so, life has moved on. But anyway, thanks very much for calling. I'm now joined by Theo Usherwood, who is LBC's political editor. Before we go to PMQs, Theo, has anything been happening?
So Penny Mordaunt's team have deleted a tweet put out on Penny Mordaunt's account, which was quoting a Daily Telegraph article. And the tweet read, "Tory MPs, vote for Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss today, and you'll murder the party you love." Now, that was deleted after a couple of minutes, but not, of course, before it'd been screenshotted by the entirety
half the country, I think.
of Twitter. But of course, it speaks to this fact that this has become a very bitter war between the various factions vying to become the leader of the Conservative Party, and that's going to form a huge part, I'd imagine, of Keir Starmer's attack lines PMQs in the next few moments.
Well, I noticed Boris Johnson referring to, what was it, a ferret up the left trouser leg of the Labour Party or something in the last general election. But it just feels like there's an awful lot of ferrets at the moment, all playing it out in a sack.
Yes, so I think, broadly speaking, there's going to be two parts to PMQs. Firstly, there's going to be Keir Starmer's main line of attacks. You may be in a better position to comment on this than me. But I'd imagine he's going to go on the economy, of course, particularly around inflation, up to 9.4% this month. And of course, it's predicted by the Bank of England to hit 11% by the end of the year. How that translates into people's real terms, what they can spend, what they can afford, and the prospect now for a recession.
And Simon Clarke got doing the rounds this morning, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, of course, Rishi Sunak's number 2, attacking Rishi Sunak for decisions that he was himself involved in.
Yes, and he couldn't, of course, name the tax rises that he actually opposed whilst he was Rishi Sunak's number 2. But it was interesting also, just particularly when he was on, Simon Clarke was on LBC, he actually toned down something of the attack lines when he was asked about Rishi Sunak, saying that Liz Truss was his preferred candidate. Simon Clarke's always been seen as Boris's man inside the Treasury, when, of course, Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So he's loyal to Boris, and we know that Liz Truss is going to effectively be, and she is, the continuity candidate for the Boris Johnson project, taking on the 2019 manifesto around levelling up. But what's interesting about what Simon Clarke was saying this morning was he was pointed in the fact that he didn't want to go after Rishi Sunak personally, but make no mistake, Keir Starmer...
It's a bit late for that now. It really is a little bit late for that now. The Labour Party's produced this amazing little clip. It's only a minute long.
2.5 million views.
Yeah. Which is, just to be clear, it's only the words of Conservative candidates
with some sort of dooming music. You may even, I can't even remember the name of the
I can't remember. Is it Carmina Burana or so, I think?
Yes, that's it, isn't it? But the point, where were you watching the debates?
Carl Orff, by the way.
Where were you watching the debates?
Well, I didn't watch the first one.
Did you watch Sunday night?
I watched Sunday night, yes.
Where were you?
I was home in Wales.
And how many, you may not drink, you may know, how many cups of tea? You do drink. Okay. How many, I didn't want to presume, but as you watched that debate, how many beers did you get through as you sat back and enjoyed watching that TV debate, Chris?
Well, I didn't have any, actually, because we'd had a big party the day before. It was the Labour party in my house the day before, and I wasn't going to be drinking anything on Sunday.
But it must have been enjoyable from your point of view.
Oh, I mean, the great delight for any political party is if your opponents decide to start attacking each other and undermining themselves by saying, oh, well, I never agreed with that thing that I told you 3 months ago that I did agree with. So, I mean,
You've got
and weirdly, I think I could see the chamber yet on Monday when Boris Johnson was doing the confidence vote, or the no confidence vote, which was a very strange affair and a very rambling, and he looked as if he'd had a good party or a good lunch, maybe. Yeah. What was striking to me was most of the decent Tories weren't there. It was mostly just his defenders in the chamber, but quite a lot of Tories afterwards were going, he's a better performer than any of the other lot that we're going to have.
And do you agree with that?
He's clearly a better performer. I mean, it doesn't add up to a row of beans for me, and I think he's corrupted the Conservative Party, and it's a scorched earth policy. That's what he's left with now.
Any of the three you're more worried about than Boris Johnson?
So I was saying earlier, I was asked by a friendly Tory MP this yesterday, and he sort of got me in a corner and he said, you've got to be absolutely honest about this, Chris. Which of the three? And I said, well, the thing is, I'm not complacent at all because, I've been in the Labour Party a long time. I know what we can do to ourselves. But I think all three are complicit in where we're at today. They've all been ministers, pretty much throughout. Rishi only resigned at the very last minute when the wind had already turned.
But as campaigners, do you see any of them as
None of them's a campaigner. Not one of them. I mean, Liz Truss can't answer questions, which is why she hasn't done a single TV interview in the whole of the leadership race so far. She looked terrified in her pussy... Why is it called a pussy bow?
I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, but I think it was trying to
look like Mrs. Thatcher. Yes, and the earrings as well. It's all very extraordinary. Rishi, I mean, his problem is he's very thin-skinned.
He has walked out of interviews, or his aides have asked for interviews to be curtailed very quickly.
He's very thin-skinned in the chamber as well, and so I can't see that. And Penny just seems...
But there must be
a bit underpowered to me.
There must be one.
I mean, it's a bit like, do you think Theresa May... Well, let's bring Theresa May back.
Who do you think most resembles Theresa May? Because, of course, Theresa May lost the Conservative majority in 2017.
Oh, Liz Truss is the most...
So that would be
that
would be the ideal. That'd be the ideal one for you. But if the Tory party,
if I'm really honest, I'm perfectly happy with any of the three. The one who would have given us real problems was Tom Tugendhat, because he was genuinely able to say he didn't vote for the Owen Paterson motion when the government tried to tear up the rule books to protect their one guy. Service in the armed forces, talking about a clean slate, starting from fresh, talking about trust. All of that, and the polling showed that would have been a problem, but they got rid of him.
So there you are.
Which says it all.
Do you think getting rid of Boris was gave Keir Starmer the keys to number 10?
Well, I thought it was interesting. Boris Johnson last week said that Keir Starmer wasn't lethal, and I was thinking, well, he's bumped you off, mate. And I think Keir is very good at strategy. Just making sure we're doing the one thing that needs to be done. And we've got something... we know what we've got to do in 6 months, 12 months' time.
So he's seen ahead. So what's the next part of the plan? Now he's got rid of...
The next part of the plan is the plan for Britain. So there was... the first thing he had to do was get control of the Labour Party again. Take it off... take us away from the madness. I keep a diary. And he had said day 132 of the madness, day 145 of the madness, because we were in a terrible, terrible shape when it came up to the 2019 election. We had lots of policies which individually were quite popular, but as a package they weren't.
Yes. Okay.
But now what he's got to do is he's got to go, right, all right, so let's start from a clean slate. where we're at now, cost of living crisis, lots of people feeling poorer than they were when the Conservatives came to power, 15 years of government, all the rest of it. But what's our plan? So for instance, for me, if he came to me and said, Chris, what's the one policy that you would advance, which is not part of our manifesto pledge at the moment, it is free universal childcare. I think that enables more people to enter the workforce. Expensive. It's expensive, but it enables more people to enter the workforce. It provides jobs for a set of people. It improves childcare in many cases, and it takes away the complicated decisions that lots of families have to make because childcare is so expensive.
From naught to preschool.
Yeah, that's what I would do, and I would make it state run or state provided, so you can have a bit of a mixed economy in there. It's just that I look at so many businesses at the moment. I've got family who run pubs. They cannot get enough staff. They close at 10 o'clock sometimes, and they don't open some days because they just can't get enough staff. Same happening in restaurants. We can't get enough staff for baggage handling in airports. We can't get enough staff to run a passport office properly, let alone the DVLA, and so many
Michael Gove said as much yesterday in a speech to Policy Exchange, and that may well come up at PMQs.
Exactly. And yet we've got pretty much full employment. Admittedly, lots of people on insecure and not very well paid employment, so there's an issue down there as well. But if you could get more people back into the workforce, because childcare isn't that massive.
But can Keir Starmer sustain that for 2 years, 2.5 years potentially until the next election? Because
January 2025 is the last date, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's a long time. That's a long stretch potentially to run in opposition, albeit against somebody you may prefer to run against rather than Boris Johnson, and to maintain that, if you like, that freshness, so that by the time you get to the next election, Keir Starmer remains that agent of change, that person.
I think he's got that capacity, not least because he's shown that he has managed to take control of the Labour Party. That was the bit I was always very frightened. I remember a few of us, Labour MPs, sitting in the tea room after the 2019 election, and we were going, well, what is our role in life? And we were going, you know what? The thing we've got to do is we've got to hand over the Labour Party to the next generation without actually completely breaking it. And we are in a 10 times better place than I thought that we would be now.
If for whatever reason, and of course Durham police aren't bringing the fire, so Keir Starmer's not resigning, but if for whatever reason you thought there was a leadership there was a race in the next 6 months, do you think the left of the party, those who voted for Jeremy Corbyn, for Rebecca Long-Bailey, do you think they would come back out of the woodwork?
Now, you're interviewing me, Theo, and this is my show, that's very, very nice of you, A, and B,
But do you think
I never answer hypothetical questions like that, and I bet you, actually...
Like Wes Streeting, Lisa Nandy, do you think they could remain... Do you think they could continue that?
I bet you, if Liz Truss is Prime Minister, she will not make it to the next general election. She'll self-combust.
We'll do the whole thing. What next summer?
She'll self-combust. She won't last it.
But just on the question, do you think
you're going to try and go back to the hypothetical question all over again? Are you? We can't keep on doing hypothetical questions.
But
there must be a moment at which the Prime Minister starts answering some questions in Parliament.
Is the party in a state where Keir Starmer? He won't name his successor, but they could continue that. They can continue that legacy.
Theo. Keir Starmer will be the leader at the next general election.
I was just trying to see whether you thought the party had changed enough that whoever takes over continues that legacy in terms of modernising the Labour Party and bringing it sort of fit for purpose.
Look, you know what?
I wasn't trying to get you to say something about whether Keir Starmer's there at the next election. I was trying to get you to say whether you think the Labour Party has been taken to such a place where somebody of the Wes Streeting ilk could take over without the Corbyn, those who supported Jeremy Corbyn, Rebecca Long-Bailey, suddenly coming back into the party and staging that sort of that entryism coming back into the Labour Party.
What Keir has seized back the Labour Party. It's in a much more sensible place, closer to where voters are at. But the key is to do what Tony Blair managed, which is to get everybody who voted for Jeremy Corbyn and everybody who voted for Tony Blair all to vote Labour.
That's hard.
But that's what you've got to do to win. That's the only way you win a general election, isn't it? And that's what we've got to do. We've got to seize... I don't even think about it in terms of left, right, centre ground or anything like that. It's just about having a policy offer and a set of people that you have confidence and trust in. And of course, if a government has been in power for 15 years, there's an element of there's just a referendum on them, because you go, hang on, what? Michael Gove is still a minister, or whoever. But I think the problems are going to be much bigger for the Conservative Party, because the cost of living crisis is not going away anytime soon. Lots of people think that they've underestimated it. All the conversation we were having earlier today about, whether Britain is broke, Michael Gove confessing that they can't even hand out passports, and you should come into my office someday. I mean, that's all my staff are doing, is trying to sort out passports for people. No, you have to queue for hours, 4-hour queue. My staff go down to the room in Portcullis House, queue for 4 hours to be able to deal with a single passport on behalf of a constituent. It's utterly bonkers.
And just bringing it back to PMQs, do you think Boris Johnson is going to receive a round of applause at the end, as David Cameron was when, of course, he
and Tony Blair most famously did, I suppose, yes.
Or well, do you think you're a parliamentarian with gazillion years experience.
Gazillion. I'm only 60.
But when you became, MP in 2005?
2001.
2001,
so even longer.
So 22 years experience.
So what Boris Johnson has to do...
Will he get an applause when he leaves, when he walks out of the chamber?
It depends. Well, it's looking a bit as if the chamber's a bit fuller than it was last time. I always think a little bit of generosity from the opposition is a good thing in politics, because actually politics can be bruising. But he is leaving as a disgraced Prime Minister. An utterly disgraced...
2.5 years he's lost an 80-seat...
Yeah, exactly. He's completely squandered his 80-seat majority and not achieved anything. And I think a lot of people in the country will be glad to see the back of him. What MPs will do about it, who knows? Theo, what do you take from that?
Let's quickly run through what was said. And of course, you said that there would be, and quite rightly predicted, that there would be generous... Keir Starmer would be generous in the first instance to the Prime Minister. He started it off by wishing Boris Johnson and his family...
Which I remember Neil Kinnock never did when Mrs Thatcher left. Interesting, because Keir and Boris hate each other.
Yes, but he started off with that... he was generous to the PM, saying he wished him, regardless of the vitriol and the opposition that they've both put up to each other, and the slangy matches and insults that have been traded over the last 3 years, 2.5 years even, Keir Starmer making the point that he wished the Prime Minister the best for the future. And then, of course, it came onto the TV debates, as we knew it would, and linking that to the economy, pitching Rishi Sunak versus Liz Truss. Keir Starmer actually trying to force the Prime Minister to say which side he was on in that debate, particularly around tax and spending plans. Of course, we know that Liz Truss would like to put the COVID debt on a much longer term footing, even if it costs the taxpayer a huge amount of money.
It's a bit late to do that now. We had to do that at the time rather than now.
Yes, where interest rates are much higher.
Remortgaging is often more expensive than the original mortgage.
It is when the Bank of England is putting up the base rate. Yes. Yeah. But of course, what was interesting actually about Boris Johnson was that he came down in defence of Rishi Sunak's tax and spending plan. He didn't suddenly disown what the Treasury's been doing for the past 2 years. On the other hand, and he has to, because it was otherwise he's effectively saying that there was a seismic split between the Treasury and Number 10. And what would that say about his prime ministerialship if he's suddenly going to try and abandon what Rishi Sunak has done?
I mean, it just showed to me that all the conversation we've been having this morning was shoehorned into very few questions, because basically the Tory leadership
maybe
contest
Keir Starmer's team was listening to your show.
I doubt. Well, he shouldn't be, obviously. But I mean, more importantly, I just think that everything that we're seeing at the moment is a gift to the Labour Party. But what is worrying is it doesn't feel as if there are any answers for the people out there. And I've been really struck in the leadership debate. Nobody has mentioned the NHS at all yet.
No.
6.6 million people waiting, and some of them for more than one treatment.
And some of them waiting for very critical treatments as well.
Absolutely, and hips and knees and all the rest of it. And we still haven't got the workforce plan that was meant to have been placed by the end of the year. Loads of problems. And interestingly, government ministers not turning up. The Leader of the House, for the first time ever, has refused to meet me this week as chair of the Committee on Standards.
But what was interesting about Keir Starmer is what he was trying to do is actually, and you're quite right to say they're really important questions that aren't being addressed by the Conservative leadership debate. But what Keir Starmer was trying to do is just to keep it on what people are talking about in terms of the TV debates themselves. Because, of course, effectively, and you're right to say this, and Michael Gove admitted this yesterday, government is on hold until there's a new. We know that the online harms bill.
He was saying more than that. It's not just on hold. It's broken. It's not working. It's not functioning.
But we know that the online harms bill, for a really important piece of legislation, whichever side of the fence you come down on, free speech, whatever, that's being paused now until the autumn.
The economic crime bill, which is necessary for dealing with Russian dodgy money. Yeah.
Decisions aren't being made. And then on the substantive point, and again this went back to the TV debate, Keir Starmer, and he didn't get an answer from Boris Johnson on this, but raised the point that Kemi Badenoch made in the debates, where she said, well, I did press the Chancellor about whether the COVID loans, that's £17 billion, whether the structure was actually in place to ensure that money wasn't misused or claimed fraudulently, and that my concerns about that scheme were dismissed. And Keir Starmer trying to elicit some sort of answer from Boris Johnson, which didn't elicit an answer that he wanted to.
Indeed.
About whether actually anybody had picked up on what Kemi Badenoch was actually saying when she raised those concerns.
Now, you've hit the most important issue there, Theo, inadvertently, which is it Badenoch or Badenoch? Because I raise this because when I was a child, we had relatives who lived near Aviemore, and there's a Loch an Elan, which has an island in the middle of it, and it was the home of the Wolf of Badenoch.
Right. So there was an initial thing for broadcasters.
So I think of her as the Wolf of Badenoch or Badenoch.
The initial received wisdom was that it was Badenoch, and now it's been said to us that it
gets corrected to Bad Enoch in autocorrect. Mind you, the constituency next to me is called, in the Rhondda, is called Ogmore, which corrected in autocorrect becomes Gomorrah.
Right.
So I don't know why that means, what constituency I'm in. Anyway, Theo, thank you very much. I'm Chris Bryant. You're listening to me, Chris Bryant, Labour MP for the Rhondda on LBC. That was, of course, Boris Johnson's last Prime Minister's questions ever. In just a moment, I'll be asking you to phone in to tell me what you think the Prime Minister's legacy will be, if legacy is the right word for it. What will the Tory candidates and the country, for that matter, be inheriting? He said last week that he was leaving with his head held high. Is that what you think? Or is he a disgraced Prime Minister? Particularly interested to hear from Conservative members, Conservative voters. We've had Boris Johnson's last Prime Minister's questions. It's still rumbling on a little bit. There may be a few more questions yet. But do you think Boris Johnson, I hate it when people just call him Boris, is leaving with his head held high, as he said last week? Do you feel better off or worse off after his time in office? What do you think of his conduct in office? Tearing up treaties that he'd only just signed a couple of years ago, endlessly lying, arguably to the House and certainly to the country, using statistics falsely, wasting vast amounts of taxpayers' money on unusable PPE, fraud, dishonesty, laziness, never turning up to Cobra meetings, including this week. He's only just answered one question about using disposable barbecues and that being irresponsible given the heat situation. He said, well, people should behave responsibly. Do you think Boris Johnson has behaved responsibly in office? Or do you think, like I do, that he's leaving disgraced? I want to hear from you, so give me a call on 0345 60 60 973 or text on 84850 and tweet at LBC. Now, Jane from Worcester woman, of course, used to be the key demographic that all parties had to fight over. So are we fighting over you at the moment?
No, you're absolutely not. I was a Conservative voter, never again. I just think, Chris, it's really important that Boris Johnson is not allowed to rewrite history. And I remember when he came to power saying to my husband, when the character and the morals and the integrity and the decency of the person you put in office no longer matter to you because the cause, in this instance it was Brexit, is greater, then the country is in trouble. And we were in trouble. And I think it's so important that he is not allowed to rewrite history because his actions had consequences. When I listen to him now at question time, accusing Keir Starmer of, keeping us all in lockdown, forever and ever, which is such a disingenuous thing to say. Keir Starmer called for a lockdown at Christmas. Johnson accused him of bringing the Grinch and delayed that lockdown. And it's been said that over 27,000 lives were lost, avoidable death, based on that decision. And not to mention the amount of lives that were lost at the, delayed to lockdown early on. And people need to remember that. That's 27,000 families destroyed. There's everything. We've got Cheltenham, we've got Anfield, we've got the nursing home scandal, we've got Wallpapergate, Treehousegate, Partygate, not to mention his behaviour with, before he came to office. And I just think people need to look long and hard at the person that they put in office and not flower it out now that it's something that it wasn't. It was a disaster and the country has suffered. I
agree, Jane, of course. And one of the other things is that is what he's done to the rest of the Conservative Party, because he ended up having ministers going out having to defend his lies and effectively excusing bad behaviour by saying, well, I don't think the voters are interested in this. But tell me one thing. It's rumoured that he's going to have not just one but 2 resignation honours lists. How does that make you feel?
I need to get my blood pressure. No, seriously. I mean, okay, I don't want to get personal, but if Nadine Dorries is on that list, I'm going to, I really will. I mean, I just despair because you know what he's going to do. You only have to look at, the Lebedev situation, Why isn't anybody asking that question? I know Yvette Cooper has. He went to a party after being to a NATO meeting where he ditched his security. He went to a party in Italy where God knows what went on, and came back and, hey presto, a little while later, Lebedev has popped into the House of Lords. The system is wrong. The likes of me haven't a chance of changing that. But, it's corrupt. And what is it? It's favours for what? Because, to be frank, that's what Johnson does. He looks after himself. If he gives something, he wants something, yeah? Nothing for nothing. And anyone, it was like his latest, the party that he said he wasn't having, the one in Chequers, which wasn't a wedding party, but maybe was a wedding party, who knows? Who was at that? Who attended that? Who paid for that?
Yes.
And it just goes on and on and on.
Indeed, Jane, you and I think between us, we could go on and on. There's a lot to go on, isn't there? But let's hear from somebody with, I suspect, Samantha from Letchworth has a slightly different take on this. Samantha, hi there, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. You're a bit more positive about Mr. Johnson, are you?
I am, yes. I'm a Conservative voter. I'm proud of Boris. He has tried his hardest. He's wanted to be the Brexit Prime Minister, but obviously he's had COVID on his way. He's had the war in Ukraine, and he's tried his best. And everybody and anybody has been out. I think he has. And if there was a general election tomorrow, I would vote for him.
Do you think he tells the truth?
Yes.
You hesitated. I could have driven a 50-long carriage of trains through that silence.
No, I think for me,
you don't think he tells the truth. Come on, you're fibbing now. You've caught it from him. You've been infected by him.
No, what it is I think he does tell the truth, but I think on some places where you twist the truth.
In other words, he lies. Samantha, honestly, have you got kids, Samantha?
I have. I've got 5.
5 kids, and but what? I don't know where to go with this. I just got this impression that it's all right to twist the truth, but honestly.
Well, it's okay to twist the truth towards your children if you have to lie to them a little bit, don't you? So I'm not calling us children, obviously, but I think he's tried his hardest. And no offence to you, but I wouldn't vote Labour. I could never vote Labour.
Okay. Well, you're making a terrible mistake, but it's really nice. Thanks very much for ringing in, Samantha. Look, good luck with the kids, and don't ever lie to them. Now, Jules from Swindon. Jules, what's your take?
2 points, really. The first is very, very small hygiene point. You said earlier, talking to Theo, that you don't engage in hypotheticals, and all politicians engage in hypotheticals at every election, because the whole thing is, if you vote for me, I will do this.
Okay, good point. I feel caught. Well done.
please tell all your colleagues to stop using that one because it's an insult to the intelligence. Anyway, right, move on.
Some things are more hypothetical than others, however, I would argue. But anyway, carry on, Jules. Go on.
The substantive point is, I'm slightly worried for Boris's legacy because, you know, he has exposed beyond all argument that the good chap theory of government, where everything's done by conventions and traditions, doesn't work, and that a bad actor in that role, however they get there, can do pretty much whatever they like, and no one can actually stop them.
Yeah.
And Boris's saving grace in that regard from becoming a tyrant is Boris Johnson. His saving graces, such as they are, that stopped him becoming a tyrant, is he's lazy and he's incompetent. So if we get someone who isn't lazy and who is competent and is a bad actor, and we haven't changed the constitution to stop prime ministers in their tracks, and ministers generally, because it's the Crown in Parliament, they can do what they want.
Jules, you are making a very good point, and I agree with you a lot, because I wrote a booklet about this about 10 years ago. I completely agree. You know, and one of the things I found quite dangerous is Jacob Rees-Mogg repeatedly going out there and saying, well, he's the Prime Minister, and as long as he's got the confidence of the House of Commons, he can do what he wants. Well, I don't buy that. I think you need more checks and balances, because otherwise you might as well have the Stuart Kings in power. And I think... I can't remember who it was. Somebody you might know, Jules, who it was, said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the danger, isn't it? If you have a kind of presidential system, which is kind of where some of this seems to be leading.
Well, yeah. What I was hoping, having I know that you're active in this sort of area and take an interest in it, but what sort of checks and balances could we put in?
Well, you could have a written constitution, which I would favour. I don't think you should have a House of Lords constructed in the way we do at the moment. I mean, it's manifestly corrupting of politics, and people. I don't think anybody should ever have a job for life. I think there's lots that we could put in, and for that matter, you could have. The Prime Minister should have an independent advisor on the ministerial code who can launch investigations into ministers without the Prime Minister's say-so, including into the Prime Minister if necessary. Jules, I'm really grateful to you. Thanks very much for calling in. Let's cross to the Commons.
I'm looking for Mr.
We can see lots of Tories standing and applauding the Prime Minister. Nobody on any of the opposition benches doing that. It's very different from... previous resigning prime ministers. I think when David Cameron resigned and left the House of Commons, did his last prime minister's questions, I remember being in the chamber. I certainly stood and applauded, even though I'd completely and utterly disagreed with everything he'd ever done. I think what really comes to my mind, Benjamin Disraeli in the 19th century was obviously later a Conservative prime minister, more than one occasion, but he said that a Conservative government was an organised hypocrisy. And watching all those Tories stand up and applaud Boris Johnson, where they've only just got rid of him, when they voted in a vote of no confidence against him, just makes me think that it's a bunch of hypocrites, really. Anyway, what do you think? It's not just about me. What do you think of the Prime Minister's legacy? He's still the Prime Minister. We've still got him till September. Most other countries, when a Prime Minister is disgraced, they leave immediately. That's what's just happened in Sri Lanka, isn't it? But call me on 0345 6060 973 or text 84850 or tweet at LBC. We're talking about the Prime Minister's legacy. What did you think of that? He says, we've transformed our democracy and it was mission largely accomplished. Focus on the road ahead, but don't forget to look in the rear view mirror. What do you think? Let's go to Andrew in Poole. What do you think? You happy with him?
Most definitely not, Chris. First of all, congratulations to you on everything that you do in the Commons and in the committees. Your speech the other day in the Commons in the debate was absolutely excellent. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I think we've had the whole of my family ring in now.
I think what he's done, sadly, is he's created a sort of a celebrity politics where things can be based around slogans and non-truths, but just lots of lollipops handed out to people, that, to the extent that trust in politicians has plummeted. We've lost our values of honesty and decency. I started out a Conservative voter for years, and to me there were values that were associated with the Conservative Party, which that party has now moved to become some sort of UKIP light, and in the process has wrecked politics as we knew it, and all the honesty and decency associated therewith. Left many people, particularly those on low incomes and so on, in great difficulty, and those that say they like him or ridiculously were just standing up and applauding him. I kind of want to say, if you had a daughter and she brought him home and described his self and all that he could, all of the shenanigans, if I can just call them that, would you want your daughter to be marrying this man? And yet some people will still stand there and say, oh, I quite like him. To me, this is all about you guys in the Labour Party getting your act together. This is the time for Labour, just as it was when John Major, who was nothing like Boris Johnson, I hasten to point out, but whose government was marred in scandal. Along came Tony Blair with a vision for the country he could sell to people that they could bite in on, and that is what is needed here from Keir Starmer right now. A great guy, done good things, as you said, but we need something to bite on. Yep.
It's a good challenge to us. Thanks very much, Andrew. I certainly don't take anything for granted. I think the question that's rattling around in my brain is, most voters will be wondering, do you feel safer? Do you feel more prosperous? Do you feel happier? Do you feel more confident in the future of the country after these Johnson years? But let's go to Damien in Bexley Heath. Damien, how are you feeling about Boris's head and its being held high or not?
Yeah, hi, Chris. That's just made me feel a bit sick listening to him there. It's so embarrassing. He can hold his head high if he wants, if that's how he feels, but he's put himself so far in the gutter, everyone else is just looking down on him, no matter how high he holds it. It's frustrating as well, Chris, I'll be honest, because from your guys, from my perspective, you guys could have called him out a lot more on a lot of different things. It's just such nonsense. And look, nonsense gets votes these days. Brexit, Trump, it works. Sound bites, all this works. But, you know, the stuff, all this thing, what everyone's asked about him, what about Johnson? He got all the big calls right. What I sent you research was, what did he get right? And they'll say vaccines. And
he didn't get the vaccines right because France, Germany, Italy, all the other countries have higher vaccination rates than we do. But anyway, go on to the next one.
He pulled out in it straight away. But even the choice he made, why did he make that choice? Is it because he was so worried about this virus that he wanted to do the best thing? No, he did it because of Brexit. He only did it, whether it was good or not good, because he knew that it was something that if it worked, it could help the Brexit cause. If it didn't, he didn't care. And like I was saying to researchers, my analogy of him is, he's like, if you have a football team, no matter how good all the other players are, you've got this guy, centre midfield, every time the ball comes to him, he boots it. He hits a big toe, it could go into the crowd, it could go in his own goal, it could hit him in the face, which it seems to a lot, or the odd time it could go into the opposition's goal and he scores a goal. And he cheers that goal to the ends of the world. But like he with sound bites, with a question, PMQs, I mean, you guys have to, Keir Starmer has to call him out on this stuff. There's nothing he did that Labour weren't pushing first in restricting.
Well, the windfall tax, most notably. Yeah, Damien, I get your point, and that's two callers in a row now who've laying down a challenge for Labour, and I'm very happy to take up that challenge. Damien, thanks very much. Now, Tom in Enfield, I think you are a member of the Conservative Party, aren't you? So obviously you're a big supporter of Boris Johnson.
No, I'm not, I'm afraid. I was, but the scales have dropped from my eyes. I think he's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. So I will be voting in the choice of three. But no, I mean, I find him nauseating, and I have done since the Barnard Castle, roughly the Barnard Castle, and then Dominic Cummings leaving. And then I just realised, no, the guy's hopeless, and it's going to be chaos from here on in. I just want to thank you for all the work you've done in exposing the Owen Paterson stuff. And I think you interviewed him, didn't you, in a committee about the Lavrov party in Italy? Because that got played on LBC. So, and yeah, he's just ridden roughshod over all of our democracy, integrity, telling the truth. I mean, politics is a slippery game, as I'm sure you know, but there's limits. Do you know what I mean? I think there's a big disconnect between Conservative parliamentarians and Conservative members like me. I think members like me, a lot of us are thoroughly disgusted with him.
I've picked that up. I was at another wedding recently, and there were quite, at a party actually, and there were quite a lot of Conservatives there, and they were members of the Conservative Party, that is, and they were absolutely furious because they felt that the whole party had been trashed, and the country's reputation had been trashed as well in the process, and that we'd become a bit of a laughingstock. You just have to read some of the international papers. Let me ask you one little question though, Tom. Who are you going to vote for?
My preferred option was Tom Tugendhat. I'm a centrist, a moderate, decent. I'm a truck driver. I've worked in the NHS in the past, public sector, private sector. I mean, I suppose Penny Mordaunt is the least bad of the three.
But is that because we just don't know her?
Yeah, well, she's just... The reason the members like her is because she's cleaner than the other two in terms of Boris. I mean, the Boris infection. Boris has turned the Conservative Party into a Boris cult, in my opinion, and we've got to disinfect ourselves from that. I don't think there's enough parliamentarians willing to do that yet. So I think Liz Truss will be terrible, and she'll definitely lose the next election quite badly.
Just to go back one sec, Tom.
Yeah.
What you're saying there about the parliamentary party, my impression, obviously I'm a Labour MP, but my impression of the new intake of Conservative MPs who came in 2019 is that they were all created in the Boris Johnson mould. And that's a worrying thing for you, I think, at the next general election. But look, Tom, I'm really grateful for you calling in. Thanks very much, and I hope you have fun choosing between one of the three. You don't sound very enthusiastic about any of them. And of course, it was meant to have been Tom Tugendhat in this chair today, but you got me, because I think Tom's voice kind of finally gave out. But there we are. Thanks very much, Tom. Well, where have we got to? People in Britain, do you feel that this has been an enlightening 2.5 years? Or has it just been a disgrace?
He's still a cunt. A fucking cunt. Dennis Nielsen, Shipman, Sutcliffe, Fred and Rosemary West. All mediocre murderers, Boris body count is best. Diver and delay on lockdowns paired with puzzling plans. 140,000 deaths from COVID on his hands. While care home residents and staff queued at the pearly gates, his government dished out PPE